All right, thank you very much, Stephen, and I appreciate your facilitating this room. Stephen's going to be keeping an eye on chat, so if you would like to put any comments into chat, that would be very helpful. I'm also sharing a link here to a shared Google Doc for this session, and you'll see several places throughout the presentation where you can add your thoughts to that document as we go. After this session, I'll also be happy to share out the slides and the Google Doc that we share together. So feel free to add your thoughts as we go. So I'm Tanya Means. I'm Assistant Dean and Director of the Teaching and Learning Center at the College of Business at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I'm going to be sharing with you some ideas for building an engaged community in Canvas. In our session, it's only a 30-minute session, so I'm going to talk pretty quickly, but wanted to cover some things on presence, connection, and engagement. I'm going to give you some getting started ideas and talk about some ways that you can make this all work with Canvas, and we'll wrap it up. All right, so first of all, just talking about presence. So I like using this kind of a slide just to be able to talk about, we talk about the in-person classroom as being a connected experience, but many times this is often feels like a distance education situation in which we're kind of isolated. So when we think about presence, what we're trying to do is to talk about the type of distance that we're talking about. So what we want to do is try to pay attention to the pedagogical distance and the ways that we close the gap between what we want to do as instructors and what the students know that they need to do. If we think back to what Trenton talked about this morning, and rather than focusing on the geographical distance that we have between ourselves. So this is one of the places where you can jump into that Google Doc that I put into the chat. And Stephen, if you want to copy it and paste it again for anybody who's joined us since I put that in there, that'd be great. But in terms of teaching presence, what we're trying to talk about is how we're supporting our students through the learning activities and balancing those with the different types of learning activities, as well as their encouraging their active engagement in the learning process. How are we providing them with feedback and the actual instruction itself? In terms of the social presence, what we're talking about is how we are asking students to interact with their learning experience. So do they have the opportunities to tie the things that they're learning and their experiences that they have as real people, and how can they have that be a social activity where they're sharing that with others? In terms of the cognitive presence, we're asking for how students are constructing meaning from the content that they're consuming through the course. And this is really important to have points of reflection and critical discourse. So all of these things that we do when we're teaching are a part of this presence. And a lot of times when we are in the in-person classroom, these things come pretty naturally. We are comfortable doing them. We recognize opportunities more easily, and it's a very natural experience. But once we start moving into using an LMS or using Zoom, we have to start being a little bit more intentional about how we do these kinds, how we build these kinds of presence into our teaching. The important thing about presence is that it leads to connection. So the connection is how we're using the activities and the content in our course to facilitate, to create, and to maintain a human connection. We don't want our learning experiences to be these isolated events that happen all on our own. We really want to make everyone feel that they belong, everyone as a part of what's going on in the classroom, and that we're connected to each other through the different tools and mechanisms that we have available to us. So I've linked in this presentation to an article that talks about some ways that we can be more inclusive in our teaching. And some of the key pieces that they provided were to recognize that all forms of diversity can be an asset to the learning experience. And that it's about our mindset and how we represent ourselves and how we represent the course and how we integrate that mindset and share that mindset with our students. one of the key pieces that they pointed out in the article is that providing more structure will make it a more inclusive experience, because when there's too little structure, we leave students behind and help them or make them feel like they don't know what's going on and they don't feel like they fit in. So if we allow time for thinking, time for critical reflection, and time for students to share with each other, we can also make that feel like more of an inclusive experience. So there's several different ways that we can make those connections. We have activities that we can do that connect the student to the instructor. And these are the kinds of things that you would do to help the students to feel like they're connected to you as the person who's providing the instruction. So in the beginning, we can do things to introduce ourselves. The Message Students Who tool in the new analytics and in the gradebook can be used to, if you post a video, you can send a message to students who haven't watched the video and let them know that this is a great way to get started in the course and that you're excited about them being there. You can also use that new analytics tool to monitor the students' activity and to identify when students are either not engaging in the course at all, or maybe who are struggling through completing work that they need to do in the course. It's also helpful when you identify those students who are struggling to then reach out to them and have them schedule time to meet with you and to get caught up or to have a better understanding of what's going on in the course. Once you've gotten started, you can move to doing things that are ongoing. I love to send out announcements to my class every week to let them know these are the kinds of things that they need to do that week, or it's time for the assignment to be submitted and I've noticed that they haven't done it yet. And just to keep them in regular communication with me. Some students complain about, I get too many emails, I don't get any emails, and so letting them know how they can adjust their notification settings in Canvas is really helpful. Anytime that I can continue to connect what I'm teaching with the relevance of their life, that's very helpful. And giving students that really detailed feedback, especially through rubrics or using an audio or video response to students' assignment submissions, can help to make the students feel more connected to you as the instructor as well. And then finding ways to actually draw the students into the things that you're wanting to do. I already mentioned about reaching out to struggling students, but don't forget to also reach out to students who are doing well. They really appreciate getting those notes that say, hey, you're doing a really great job, and that new analytics tool is a great way to do that. Finding ways to humanize yourself and your students, using shorter videos, and finding ways to show your personality through your teaching. There's a lot of different technologies that you can use. I won't actually dig into a lot of them, but try to find ways to use the technologies to do both synchronous and asynchronous interaction with students. And then I've linked to an idea for some things to consider if you're going to do live online sessions and some ways to prepare for that experience. So moving now to connecting students to each other. So in student-to-student connection, we're trying to find ways to make this a social experience. So in the beginning, you can use Yellow Dig or Canvas discussions and have students introduce themselves. It's really fun to do some icebreaker activities. There's a number of different ideas that I've listed here. But try to get them to break down those initial concerns or barriers of, I don't know anybody and I'm not sure how to connect with people. So giving them some of those options. I found that having the students use an interesting Zoom background or post a pet photo is a really good way to get people to start talking to each other, because it's about something else and not necessarily just about them. Once you get going, then there's some ongoing things you can do. Definitely the groups is a great way to get students to start working together. Breakout groups in Zoom are also really helpful. One of the things that I like to do in the very beginning is to do some kind of icebreaker networking kinds of ideas where you set up the breakout groups and randomly assign them to 2 or 3 people to a group, let them go into the groups, meet each other, and then bring them back, and then reshuffle the groups and have them go back out again and meet new people. It's almost similar to what they would experience if they were walking into class and just saying hi or excuse me as they were walking in front of each other. But it's a way for them to just kind of get started talking to each other. I've also found that it's really beneficial to survey students ahead of time to get some preferences for how they can work with each other. Sometimes we have this concern about there being issues with students working together because there might be freeloaders or people who are not necessarily doing the work, but a lot of times that's just not paying attention to some of the expectations students might have. So some students may expect, I'm going to do all of the work for this group assignment a week in advance, and I need group members who are going to be the same kind of, on the same kind of time frame as me. Other times we have students who are saying, you know, I would be much better at working with a group if we all kind of worked on this the day or two before the assignment is due. And so putting people into those kinds of groups can make it so that it's a more satisfying experience for everyone. And finally, connecting the students to the content itself. So there's some fun ways to get them really excited or interested in the content. A scavenger hunt or a syllabus quiz to make sure that they've reviewed everything that's in the syllabus, giving them a tour of your course site and walking them through, here's where you go to visit, you know, to get to this information. That can be really helpful. Giving them a high level view of what the course is going to be like. Giving them a video in which you talk through some of the policies similar to what you would have done if you were in the classroom. And really critically, making sure that the assignments that you have are all visible with due dates in the calendar and on the syllabus, so they know how to plan their experience through the course. You can also use tools like Perusal or other annotation tools to help the students start to use the content in ways that are meaningful to them. So now let's move into actually talking about the engagement experience. So we've talked about the presence, we've talked about maintaining the connection. Now let's figure out, what does it look like to be engaged? How can you tell if a student is engaged in your course? Well, plenty of literature out there about engagement. I'm not actually going to talk through that, except just to say that we know that when students take ownership of what they're doing, that they're going to have a better experience, they're going to be more satisfied, and gain more value from the experience itself. We've got the practices, the good practices for how to build an engaged experience for undergraduate students. But let's actually talk about how to make it happen. So first of all, as many touch points as you can possibly have to help students to feel like they belong, to feel a part of the course is really beneficial. When you're creating a plan for the course, plan both experiences, plan for experiences and activity as opposed to, I'm going to teach on chapter 2. If you can find ways to increase the students' time on task, that's also beneficial. And using rubrics for feedback, giving them structure, as I talked about, is going to help them to feel more involved and included in the course. And then giving them intentional practice. If you have an assignment that you know is going to be pretty complicated for them, can they submit a draft, or can they submit something to make sure that they know how to submit? If you can encourage students to work with each other, I have a class that I'm teaching right now, and one of the options for students to do is to collaborate with a peer. So they both get on Zoom, they talk to each other about how they're doing in their simulation, they share ideas with each other, and then that's part of their assignment, is to post that recording. So it's a way that I'm telling them, I actually want you to talk to each other and figure out what you're doing and help each other. The intrusive outreach, I'm going to talk more about that in just a little bit, but it's you as the instructor using the tools in Canvas to continually reach out to students and say, I've noticed that either you're doing a really great job on this, or you're struggling on this, or maybe you haven't submitted this yet. If there's something I can do to help you, please let me know. And so those will really help the students who feel like, I don't know if I'm doing this right, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. They know that they have a point of contact. Incentivizing students to participate and engage and give their input, and then finding ways to bring the students into the class, whether that's if you're doing a blended class where you've got them in the classroom or online, but finding ways to help them to feel like they belong. I'm also in my class this summer doing an option for students to peer lead, so they get to sign up to lead a discussion topic during one of our live sessions. And so they are being the peer who's leading a conversation about something that's interesting to them. And that's been a good experience. But focusing in on that interaction, collaboration, and discussion, as opposed to, I'm going to cover the content in chapter 4 of the textbook or of this particular concept that I want to cover. And put another list here of some practical tips for how to do engagement. I'll just talk about a couple of them. One is around cameras. So a lot of times we think if everybody's got their camera on, I can watch them and I can see whether or not they're engaged. But recognize that sometimes students are in a place where they either can't turn on their camera, or maybe they don't have enough bandwidth to have a good camera connection. And so letting them know that it's okay if they don't turn on the camera, but you encourage them to turn on their camera, using their names when you talk to them, letting them know how to label themselves in Zoom so that they can let you know what they prefer to be called. Those kinds of things are great, as well as giving them opportunities to do fun things or to take breaks or use the sessions that you're running with them as consultations. So let's talk through just a few ideas for if you were getting started with a course, some of the ways that you could help to do all of those things that we've just talked about. So in the beginning, if you're approaching your class as this is an adventure, this is something a journey that we're all going through together. If you keep that mindset as you go through the course, then you can help to facilitate and guide the students through that experience. So some of the first things that you could do, of course, you could do a Canvas survey or a quiz to collect information about what the students know ahead of time or some of the pre-assessments that you might need to do for your course. You can survey them to figure out how to build your teams. And I've done this in a number of different ways. One way is to use a Canvas survey. You can also try a tool called CatMe. One of the things I really enjoyed doing this summer was I had taught a class in the spring, and when the class wrapped up, I asked if there were a few students who would be willing to come to my first summer class and to talk to the students in my class about what they had learned from the experience. And it was a really valuable experience for the students in the new class to be able to see the lessons learned from the previous class. Along those same lines, you can do things to try and capture what the students already know before they've started. Many people are familiar with the KWL or the know, want to know, and learned charts that you can create. Graphic organizers are fabulous, mind maps, helping the students to kind of think ahead through what they would like to learn in the class and then to document it as they go. Using a quiz or a voice thread to collect from the students what they know, or even asking them to record some kind of a video or to share a portfolio of some of their previous work can all be valuable ways to capture what they know before they come in. Also being able to get the students curious or excited about the topic. So can you engage them in a scavenger hunt, send them out to find movie clips or pictures or TV segments that relate to what it is you're talking about and share those with each other. If you can ask the students to create an annotated list of articles and share them in the discussion board, that can be one way, or asking them to interview their friends and family and say, what do you know about this topic, and report back. And one of the things I'm doing this semester is also I'm giving the students an opportunity to interview in a number of different ways, but also to then create a podcast in which they talk about what they learned through that interview process. We're using a Google Doc in this presentation for people to put their questions or their comments or the things that they'd like to share with each other. I often will use a Google Doc or Google Slides in my live sessions, my Zoom sessions, to be able to collect information from the students. While they're in their breakout groups, I can watch the Google Docs growing, and I can address particular things that people say, but it also gives me an opportunity for people to participate after the session is over, after they've had a little more time to think about it. If you can ask them to predict what they think they will learn in the course, that's a great way to get some excitement about the course, because they start thinking about what they would like to know. And that can also be helpful to you in guiding what you would like to actually teach, or how you would like to approach some of the topics. Getting the students to start reading and discussing. I mentioned perusal as one option. It's a textbook annotation tool, so you can get your text put into that tool, and then as students read and highlight and comment, they can interact with each other, they can ask each other questions, they can make notes, and it can be a shared experience for them to go through the textbook. You can also do things to create a community through Yellow Dig or Canvas discussions or VoiceThread or Zoom. All of those can be ways that you can get the students to start talking to each other. So I'm going to talk specifically now about some ways that you can make that work with Canvas itself, and talk about 3 different things: the organization and structure, people and feedback, and discussions for Canvas. So one of the things we did when we first were working with some of our students about our templates that we were building for Canvas was we asked them what it was that they noticed about a Canvas course site that helped them to know whether or not an instructor knew what they were doing with Canvas. And the things that they told us was, number 1, if you have a cover image on the dashboard, then they know that you know a little bit about what you're doing, and they have more confidence in you. I will note, though, that students mostly use the to-do list view, and so a lot of instructors will use the dashboard with the tiles, but the students are primarily looking at the to-do list. So it's really important to use that to-do list, and that's why I mentioned using the calendar itself to be able to have all the due dates, so that the students are always aware of what things they need to know. Using modules is really critical. Shara did a great presentation on why you should use modules and how it reduces the anxiety for the students. And then using the gradebook, and I mean really using it, not just kind of putting some numbers in there, but if you really use the gradebook and manage it well, the students know that everything's, they have a little more confidence in everything going well. Also, how you organize your course site is really important. So using things like assignment groups and building those assignment groups to keep different kinds of assignments together, it's going to be really helpful for your students, but more importantly, it's going to be helpful for you. And so a couple of things that I'll mention is when you set up those assignment groups, and then you also set up modules, that really can help you to later be able to filter the grade book. So I'll show you a screen of that, what that looks like in just a second. But as you build those modules, as you build those assignment groups, build them out in ways in which you can do things like, for example, in this screen, you can see I've got things marked as, the student can mark it as done. And so my students have always commented to me how much they value having that option to be able to check something off when it's done. Putting due dates on even pages helps them to keep on track and make sure that they're viewing the pages in the structure that they should be. And then labeling everything in a very consistent way is also very, very helpful. So when you create a module, there's the ability for you to be able to edit the settings of the module. You can put things like prerequisites. If you have, say I wanted to have them use my getting started module before they could view anything else in the course, then I could put that as a prerequisite, and they would have to complete everything in that module before they would be able to view what's in the next module. And then for the requirements, when you say students must complete all of the requirements, that's meaning they have to complete it all before that module is complete. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't be able to move on to module 2 unless you have module 1 as a prerequisite. But if you do that, that's where it allows you to have them have the mark done kind of option for them. Now, once you've created that assignment grouping and the module grouping, all of this structure that you've created allows you to do things like set rules. And so the rules can be that a module or an assignment group is worth a certain amount of points, or that certain things have to happen for how it's dropped, whether or not you're dropping points. But then you'll notice on the bottom of the screen here, I now have the ability to filter the gradebook. So I can filter by assignment groups, I can filter by modules, and this allows me to have, instead of a gradebook that has 25 rows across that is a little bit harder to manage, I can make it so that it's only showing me what's in week 3, and I can tell whether people have done work for different assignment groups. So it's really helpful if you built out those 2 blocks to be able to then have the gradebook work really well for you. Within modules, number of different best practices. Getting the students started in a module itself is really helpful. Organizing things by time instead of topic. So in other words, I wouldn't have a module that says chapter 2, but I would tell them what they're supposed to be doing in week 1 and have it be an actual topic name as opposed to chapter 2. Having, Shara mentioned this in her session today, having an overview page and a wrap-up page is really helpful, especially as students are going next through items in a module to make sure that they know when a module starts and when it ends. And then having somewhere in the module where it lists everything they're supposed to be doing that week, but also sending out an announcement that matches that, so that students who haven't gone to the module yet can get to those announcements and be able to see what they should be doing. Using text headers to organize it, and then using those module settings, as I mentioned, and being consistent. So once you get the pages set up, this is an example of some ways that you can have a welcome mat or a front page of your course that, just one second. Sorry about that. Okay, so setting up a homepage and having a landing place for students that looks really good, that's consistent across courses is really helpful, and making it look really inviting. Using modules links to get people to the right place at the right time is also valuable. Finding ways to embed content, whether it's audio content or video or different assessments or content, can make the experience better for the students, having that structured and organized in that way. And then using the people well. So make sure that you have a profile image and make sure that you put that photo and your contact information on your syllabus, asking the students to load their photo. You can even make an assignment that you make just complete or incomplete and ask them to load their profile image. When they submit that, they're not having to submit anything, but you see their profile images really super quick to just go through and quickly grade whether or not they've completed it. And then using the people page for the roster to be able to see your students and getting them to know each other. Using the groups to set up for team assignments, and you can randomly assign them, or as we talked about before, you can use groups to set up, you can use a survey. You can set up groups so that students can self-sign up. And then once you've got them all in the groups, then you can turn it off so they don't leave the groups. It also will let you randomly assign people to groups if they haven't done it by a certain deadline. Here's an example of an assignment that I have in my class. Tammy Beck actually created this concept of an industry analyst call, and I've iterated through adapting it several times for my courses, and I found it to be a really valuable experience where I put students into groups and have them talk about their performance on a simulation that we use. So it's been a really great way for them to kind of reflect on what they're learning. Using rubrics to give feedback is a way to use the speed grader, speed up what it is that you're saying to the students and giving them some feedback, letting them know where exactly they can improve and things like that is also hugely valuable. And then I talked already about being intrusive, but just giving them the opportunities to see those messages from you and have those be personalized messages. And then the last thing is about discussions. You can use Canvas discussions. You can have them as focused or threaded discussions. You can have them be graded, or there's lots of other ways that you can use other tools for discussions. And I'm actually running the interest group this afternoon on LTIs and integrations. And so we'll talk more about some ways that you can integrate in discussion tools in Canvas. So with that, just a few reminders. Engage with your students early, engage often, try to find ways to humanize everything that you're doing, focus on their experiences, leverage tools, but don't use 25 different tools. Try to focus your use of tools on something that's really meaningful to the students. Don't ever try more than one new thing at a time. You don't want to burn yourself or your students out. And recognize that you're going to have to iterate through and you shouldn't have to try and have everything be perfect. It's just an experience that everybody is adapting to and learning, and the more you can involve your students in that process, the better. So with that, I'll put up the session evaluation, and thank you all for participating, and I look forward to reviewing all of the comments in the Google Doc. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. I also added the link to the evaluation in the chat, so if anyone wants to access it there as well, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. If people want to stick around for a few questions here, is that okay, Tanya?
Absolutely.
All right, and then otherwise, we have about a 45-minute break for kind of quick bite of lunch for folks otherwise. But I'll stop the recording and yeah.